Thank you. Well, as always, it's a real pleasure to be able to join you and to celebrate our award winners.
The late-night phone call made Princess Anne's blood run cold. What King Charles revealed next left her absolutely speechless. He had just 6 months to live, and his dying wish was about to explode everything William and Harry thought they knew.
I think one of the mistakes we may have made in the past is the assumption of knowledge, and a huge increase in knowledge.
The sealed letters Anne clutched contained a confession so shocking, so devastating, that it would shatter both princes to their core. Charles had been hiding something for decades, and the truth about who really destroyed their brotherhood was not what anyone expected. What Anne read in those letters changed everything, and the royal family would never be the same again. The telephone at Gatcombe Park rarely rang after 10 in the evening. Princess Anne, at 74 years old, maintained a schedule built on military precision. Early to bed, earlier to rise, with few exceptions to disrupt the routine she had perfected over decades of royal service. But on a Tuesday evening in March, the phone in her private study broke the usual silence at precisely 10:47. Anne knew before answering that something significant had happened. Late-night calls in royal circles rarely brought good news. On the other end was Dr. Harrison, King Charles's personal physician. His voice carried the careful weight of someone delivering information they wished they did not have to share. The king, he explained, wanted to see his sister first thing the following morning. Alone. The word hung in the air with particular heaviness. Anne's grip tightened on the receiver. Her brother had been unwell. The palace had acknowledged as much 3 weeks earlier, with one of those carefully constructed statements that revealed just enough to satisfy public curiosity, while concealing the true severity of the situation. But this call suggested something far more serious than the official communications had implied. Anne asked the question directly, cutting through the usual protocol. How bad was it? The doctor paused before responding that the king was asking for her specifically, and that alone should tell her what she needed to know. Dawn broke gray and cold over Gloucestershire as Anne's Range Rover pulled away from Gatcombe Park the next morning. Her security detail followed at a respectful distance, but Anne insisted on driving herself. It was one of the few privileges she had refused to surrender over the years. This small act of independence in a life otherwise governed by duty and tradition. The 2-hour drive to Windsor gave her time to think, to remember, and to prepare herself mentally for whatever awaited her. Anne and Charles had never been particularly close in the way that siblings in ordinary families might be. They were 17 months apart in age, but the gap between them had always felt much wider. He was the heir to the throne. She was what royal watchers sometimes called the spare's spare, expected to be useful and reliable, but never central to the main story. Yet despite this distance, they shared something that ran deeper than simple affection. They both understood what it meant to spend an entire lifetime in service to an institution that demanded everything and acknowledged very little in return. The last time Charles had summoned her in this manner was when their mother, Queen Elizabeth, was dying. Anne had been the only one the Queen trusted to hear certain difficult truths, to carry out specific final wishes, without allowing sentiment to cloud her judgment. Now history seemed to be repeating itself, and Anne felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto shoulders that had carried such burdens before. Windsor Castle's private apartments were unusually quiet when Anne arrived. The normal activity of staff had been reduced to whispers and careful footsteps. She was escorted not to any of the formal receiving rooms, but directly to Charles's personal study. This was the one place in all his various residences where he could simply be himself, away from the constant performance that royal life demanded. Charles sat by the window, morning light falling harsh and unforgiving on features that had thinned considerably in recent weeks. At 76, he looked every one of his years, and perhaps several more besides. But his eyes were clear when they met Anne's, and his voice remained steady as he thanked her for coming. Anne settled into the chair across from him, immediately noticing the legal documents arranged on the side table beside him and a sealed envelope bearing his personal crest. She made a dry observation that this did not appear to be a social call. Charles attempted a smile that never quite formed properly on his face. The doctors, he told her, were giving him 6 months to live, perhaps less. Anne absorbed this information without any visible reaction, a skill perfected over decades of maintaining composure in difficult circumstances. She asked what he wanted from her. Charles struggled to find the right words. He was, he admitted, too much like their father in certain ways, particularly in his difficulty expressing emotional vulnerability. 76 years of training had built armor against displays of weakness. But facing one's own mortality has a way of stripping away such protective layers, leaving only the essential truths that can no longer be avoided. The conversation turned to Harry. The name sat between them like an accusation neither wanted to voice directly. Charles explained that when Harry left the royal family, when he made those damaging statements in interviews and documentaries, Charles had told himself that his son had chosen his own path. He had convinced himself that duty to the institution must come before concern for one unhappy family member who seemed unable to accept his role. Anne responded carefully that he had not been entirely wrong in that assessment, but Charles shook his head. He had not been entirely right either, he said. That was the problem. Charles finally opened the sealed envelope and withdrew several pages covered in his distinctive handwriting. He had written this letter 3 weeks earlier, shortly after receiving his diagnosis. It was actually 2 letters, one addressed to William and one to Harry, along with instructions for what should happen after his death. He handed the pages to Anne and asked her to read them. As Anne read through the letters, Charles leaned forward with an intensity that replaced his earlier fragility. This was necessary, he insisted. It was essential. It was perhaps the one thing he could do now that might matter more than any policy decision or royal decree he had ever made. But it had to be delivered correctly, by the right person at the right moment, and with the right words to make his sons actually listen to what he was trying to tell them. Anne looked up from the pages and asked if he thought she was that person. Charles replied that she was the only person who could do this. William trusted her judgment absolutely. And Harry, Charles noted, remembered her differently from how he remembered the rest of the family. She had never been part of the machinery that Harry felt had crushed him. She was simply Aunt Anne, who told him uncomfortable truths when necessary, and expected him to be better than his worst impulses. Anne read through both letters twice, understanding dawning with each careful reading. Charles was not simply leaving instructions for his sons. He was attempting to heal a wound that had been festering for years, to use his approaching death as a catalyst for something he had been unable to achieve during his life. He wanted reconciliation between his sons, and he was asking Anne to make it happen. This would be difficult, Anne said finally, for everyone involved. Charles replied that everything worthwhile was difficult. His voice carried an edge of the old authority he had wielded for so long. But if he died with William and Harry still estranged, still angry and hurt and blaming each other, then he would have failed as a father far more profoundly than he had failed in any other aspect of his complicated life. Anne warned Charles that William would resist this. The heir to the throne saw Harry's departure from royal life as a profound betrayal, not just of duty, but of their entire family. Charles nodded slowly. He understood that resistance, which was precisely why the letters he had written addressed things neither of his sons currently knew about. The letters revealed decisions he had made over the years that had shaped their conflict in ways they did not fully understand. He described how his own actions, meant to protect the institution and secure the succession, had inadvertently created the conditions for their estrangement. Charles stood with visible effort and moved to the window overlooking the gardens where he and Diana had once walked with their young sons, back when the boys were still close and the future seemed less complicated. He told Anne that he was not asking her to fix everything between William and Harry. That would be impossible. He was asking her to give them the tools they might use to fix things themselves, if they chose to do so. Anne folded the pages carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. She asked when he wanted her to deliver these letters and have these difficult conversations. Soon, Charles replied, before any public announcement about his condition was made. His sons deserved to hear about his terminal diagnosis from family, not from official palace statements. And they needed time to process both the news and the contents of the letters before the world began watching their every reaction. Charles reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a smaller envelope, this one sealed with wax. He explained that this letter was meant only for Anne herself, to be opened after his death. It would explain why she was the only person he could trust with this tremendously important task. Anne left Windsor 2 hours later, with both envelopes secured in her briefcase. The weight of her brother's final wish felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with physical mass. She had agreed to this responsibility because she always agreed when duty called. That was simply who she was. But she had also agreed because Charles was right about something fundamental. If the monarchy survived his death only to be defined by the continued bitter estrangement of his sons, then what exactly was the point of preserving the institution at all? The drive back to Gatcombe Park felt considerably longer than the morning journey had been. Anne's phone showed 17 missed calls by the time she checked it. Palace business, charity obligations, the endless turning machinery of royal life that never stopped demanding attention. She ignored all of them. Instead, she found herself thinking about 2 boys she had watched grow up under impossible circumstances. William had been groomed from birth to be king, carrying the weight of his future destiny with a combination of his mother Diana's natural empathy and his father Charles's deeply ingrained sense of duty. Harry had been the spare, brilliant, and funny, and increasingly damaged, desperate to be seen as something more than merely his brother's shadow. They had both lost so much. Their mother is far too young. Their privacy is sacrificed to constant public scrutiny. Their childhood brotherhood was gradually destroyed by competing narratives and the subtle manipulations of palace politics. And now they were about to lose their father as well. The question that Anne could not answer was whether that loss would break them further apart, or somehow, against all odds, finally bring them back together. Kensington Palace at dawn held a particular quality of focused purpose. William had been awake since 5 in the morning, as was his habit, reviewing briefings for the day's scheduled engagements and responding to the never-ending flow of correspondence that came with his position. At 42 years old, he had perfected the difficult art of compartmentalization. His personal feelings remained locked away in some interior space, while he performed the public role he had been born to play. Catherine found him in his study with his coffee gone cold and the same page of his briefing book apparently unread for the past 20 minutes. She observed gently that he seemed worried about something. William explained that Anne had called. She was coming to London that morning and had refused to explain why over the phone, saying only that the matter was urgent and required a private conversation. Catherine's expression shifted immediately. Anne was not someone given to drama or unnecessary trips to the city. If she was making a special journey and insisting on privacy, then whatever she needed to discuss genuinely mattered. Catherine suggested the obvious possibility that this concerned William's father. The palace statements about Charles's health had been carefully vague, perhaps too carefully worded. William acknowledged that he had tried repeatedly to get more information by calling his father directly, but Charles's office kept saying he was unavailable and promising to arrange something soon, which, William noted with barely concealed frustration, likely meant the situation was considerably worse than official communications were admitting. The intercom buzzed to announce that Princess Anne had arrived. She had dressed for the occasion in a simple navy suit that conveyed seriousness without any hint of melodrama. She declined the offered tea and had no patience for small talk. Once Catherine had tactfully excused herself to give them privacy, Anne delivered her news with characteristic directness. William's father was dying, 6 months at most, possibly less. She was telling him now because Charles wanted him to hear it from family first, before the machinery of official briefings and public announcements began turning. Anne withdrew the sealed envelope from her briefcase and placed it on the table between them. Charles had wanted William to have this letter. It contained his final wishes, including what he hoped for from both of his sons before his death. Both of his sons. William's voice went cold as ice when he repeated the phrase. Anne confirmed that yes, she meant Harry as well. William set the letter down without opening it and announced that the conversation was finished. Anne spoke his name, but he cut her off. He had spent 4 years, he said, watching his brother systematically attack their family and specifically attack Catherine. He had watched Harry monetize their private lives for Netflix documentaries and Oprah interviews, selling out family privacy for commercial gain and public sympathy. And now their dying father wanted him to do what exactly? Forgive and forget everything because death was approaching? Anne's voice remained completely level. Charles wanted William to read the letter. What he chose to do after reading it would be entirely his own decision. But she strongly suggested he at least read what his father had taken the time to write. William did not read the letter immediately. He let it sit untouched on his desk for 3 hours while he attended a scheduled charity engagement, smiled appropriately for cameras, and demonstrated the perfect composure expected of a future king. But the letter's presence haunted him throughout the day, a weight that could not be ignored no matter how much he tried to focus on other matters. Finally, alone in his study that evening, he opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably his father's, slightly shaky but still clear. Charles began by apologizing that William had to learn about his condition this way, but explained there were things he needed to say without the formality of official meetings or the pressure of immediate decisions hanging over them. Then Charles wrote something that made William's hand tremble as he continued reading. He stated plainly that he was the reason Harry had left. Not entirely, of course. Harry had made his own choices and bore responsibility for his own actions. But Charles accepted that he had created the conditions that made Harry's departure feel inevitable. The letter went on to detail conversations Charles had never previously shared with anyone. It described decisions made in the terrible aftermath of Diana's death that had inadvertently placed William and Harry on diverging paths. Charles explained how his own unprocessed trauma, his crushing guilt over Diana, and his desperate attempts to protect William as the heir had led him to create different rules and different expectations for each son. Charles admitted that he had told Harry when he turned 18 that his role was to support William, never to overshadow him, and that he needed to accept being fundamentally secondary in importance. Charles had thought he was being practical at the time, preparing Harry for the reality of royal hierarchy. Instead, he now realized he had essentially told a grieving teenager that he mattered less than his brother. The damage from that message had never healed. The letter continued, revealing palace decisions that Harry had always attributed to William, but which had actually originated from Charles himself. There were staff reassignments that had isolated Harry from people he trusted, media strategies that deliberately protected William's public image at Harry's expense, financial arrangements that left Harry feeling dependent and controlled, rather than valued as an equal contributor to the family's work. Charles wrote that William had thought Harry was simply jealous of his position, while Harry had believed William was complicit in his marginalization. The truth, Charles now admitted, was that he had created a system that practically guaranteed conflict between his sons, and then had stepped back and allowed them to blame each other for the resulting damage. William read the letter 3 times. Each reading revealed new layers of manipulation that had shaped his relationship with his brother. None of it had been malicious in intent. Charles had genuinely believed he was protecting the institution, securing the line of succession, and preventing the mistakes of previous generations from repeating themselves. But in doing so, he had created entirely new wounds that cut just as deep. The final section of the letter was direct in its appeal. Before his death, Charles wanted to see his sons reconciled. Not for his own sake, he insisted. He did not deserve that peace, but for William and Harry themselves, for their children who deserved to know their cousins, for a monarchy that simply could not survive another generation of public family warfare playing out in the media. Charles explained that he had written a similar letter to Harry, revealing the same truths from a different angle. What he was asking from both sons was this: meet and talk, not with lawyers present or mediators managing the conversation or press strategies being calculated. Just 2 brothers who had lost their mother far too young and were now about to lose their father, trying to find their way back to some form of relationship. Anne would facilitate the meeting if they were willing. She was the only person either of them trusted completely, and the only one who would tell them directly when they were being idiots. The letter concluded simply. Charles loved them both. He had failed them both, and he was asking them to be better than he had been. William sat in silence for 20 minutes after finishing the letter. Catherine found him there with the pages spread across his desk, and his face looking like it had been carved from stone. She asked gently what the letter said. William told her everything, his voice flat and emotionless as he recited the contents. When he finished, Catherine listened without interrupting. Her hand found his halfway through the recitation and stayed there. William finally spoke what he was thinking. Their father was manipulating them, even while dying. He was manipulating both sons into some grand gesture of reconciliation that would serve his legacy. Catherine chose her words very carefully. Perhaps that was true, she acknowledged. Or perhaps Charles was finally being honest about his role in everything that had gone wrong between his sons. Maybe both things could be true simultaneously. She moved to sit beside William and continued. She was not suggesting he needed to forgive everything that had happened. She was not even saying the reconciliation Charles wanted was possible. But maybe understanding why things had happened differently changed what forgiveness might look like, if he chose to pursue it at all. William looked at his wife, this woman who had stood beside him through every crisis, every attack, every impossible day of their life together. He asked her what she would do in his position. Catherine admitted she would be terrified, but she thought she would agree to meet Harry, not because Charles was asking for it, and not for the sake of the institution, but because the alternative was spending the rest of her life wondering if she had missed the only chance to rebuild something that had once mattered deeply. That night, William called Anne. He told her he would meet with Harry, but he had specific conditions that were not negotiable. Anne told him to name them. The meeting had to be at a neutral location, with absolutely no press presence and no recordings of any kind, and Catherine would accompany him. He needed someone there who had his back completely if the situation went badly. Anne agreed to all the conditions without hesitation. She said she would contact Harry that night to extend the same invitation. After ending the call, William found himself standing in his son George's bedroom, watching the boy sleep. George was 13 now, already beginning to show signs of the tremendous burden he would carry one day. William wondered if he could choose reconciliation over wounded pride, if he could model something better than the dysfunction that had defined his own relationship with Harry. Maybe that was the real legacy worth leaving to the next generation. Or maybe he was simply fooling himself into walking straight into another painful disappointment. William would not know which until he actually faced Harry again. And that meeting was now unavoidable. Montecito at midnight was peaceful in the way only coastal California can be. Harry sat alone on the terrace of his home. The Pacific Ocean was invisible in the darkness, but audible in its endless rhythm of waves. Megan had gone to bed hours earlier, exhausted from a full day with the children. Harry should have joined her, but sleep had been increasingly elusive lately for reasons he could not quite articulate. His phone illuminated with an incoming call from an unknown United Kingdom number. Harry almost declined it automatically. His years in California had taught him to protect his peace, to guard carefully against intrusions from his former life across the Atlantic. But something made him answer anyway. The voice on the other end was his Aunt Anne. It was quite late for her, Harry observed. Anne corrected him that it was actually quite early where she was. She needed to tell him something about his father, and it could not wait. The next 5 minutes changed everything in Harry's carefully constructed California existence. Anne's clinical delivery of Charles's terminal prognosis hit Harry with almost physical force. 6 months to live, maybe less. The man he had spent years being angry at, the father who had disappointed him in countless ways, both large and small, was dying. Harry managed to say he was sorry to hear it. Anne cut through his automatic politeness to explain that Charles had asked her to give Harry something. A letter that explained a great deal about decisions that had been made over the years, things Harry was not aware of that had shaped everything that happened between him and his family. Harry's response was defensive. He did not need explanations. He knew what had happened because he had lived through it. Anne's voice carried the authority that had commanded rooms for 7 decades. Harry did not know everything, she told him firmly, and before he responded with anger or immediate dismissal, she suggested he read what Charles had written and then decide how he felt about it. The letter arrived via secure courier the following morning. Harry held the envelope for a full hour before opening it, aware that whatever it contained would inevitably complicate emotions he had spent years trying to organize into a coherent narrative that made sense of his pain. Meghan found him in his office with the letter pages spread across his desk and tears streaming down his face. She moved to him immediately with her hand on his shoulder, asking what was wrong. Harry's voice was raw when he finally spoke. His father had known. All those times Harry had assumed William was behind certain decisions. All those moments when he had felt betrayed by his brother. Charles had known the truth and had let Harry believe his brother was responsible. Charles had orchestrated much of what Harry had blamed William for. Meghan read over Harry's shoulder, her own expression shifting from concern to anger, to something far more complex as she absorbed the contents. The letter Charles had written to Harry paralleled the one sent to William in its basic structure, but included additional context specific to Harry's experiences. There were apologies for specific moments Harry had raised publicly in interviews and documentaries. There were acknowledgments of failures Charles had never admitted to anyone, let alone in any public forum. Charles wrote that he had allowed Harry to believe he was less important because he thought he was protecting the institution. He realized now, facing the end of his life, that he had actually been protecting his own fear. If he admitted that both sons mattered equally, he would have to acknowledge that he was capable of failing them both equally. That admission had been too difficult for him to face until mortality stripped away his ability to avoid uncomfortable truths. For 3 full days, Harry did not call anyone from his old life. He read the letter repeatedly, cross-referenced its claims with his own memories, and discussed it endlessly with Meghan. His therapist had what could only be described as a field day with these revelations, helping Harry untangle years of accumulated anger to find the core truths buried beneath all the pain. The question his therapist posed during an emergency session was straightforward. What did Harry intend to do with this information? The rift with William, the decision to leave the United Kingdom, the interviews where he had aired private grievances, all of it might have been avoided if he had known what his father was now revealing. Harry suggested that maybe the revelations changed nothing. Maybe the damage was already done. His therapist offered a different perspective. Perhaps Harry and his family had all needed to reach this particular point of breakdown before the truth could actually be heard and processed. Sometimes people had to hit bottom before they could begin climbing back up. That night, Meghan found Harry in their daughter's nursery, watching her sleep with an expression she recognized. He was thinking about going back to England. Anne had informed him that William had agreed to meet. Their father wanted them to talk before he died, to have the conversation they should have had years ago. Meghan asked the question directly. Did Harry actually want to do this? Harry remained quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with conflicting desires. Part of him wanted to let everything stay broken, he admitted, to say he had moved on successfully and built a new life here, to insist he did not need any of them anymore. But there was another part of him that could not ignore a simple fact. William was his brother. Their father was dying. And this letter strongly suggested that maybe they had been fighting the wrong battle all along. He turned to face Meghan directly. What if they had both been reacting to manipulations neither of them fully understood? What if the real enemy had never been each other, but rather a system that had pitted them against one another? They talked until dawn broke over the Pacific. Meghan played devil's advocate, pushing Harry to examine his motivations from every possible angle. If he returned to England and the meeting went badly, they would be reopening wounds that had finally started to heal. The children were settled in California. Harry had found a measure of peace. Was it worth risking all of that? Harry countered with his own question. Was peace the same thing as genuine healing? Or was he simply avoiding the parts that still hurt? Meghan smiled slightly at that and acknowledged that 5 years of therapy sessions ought to produce some useful insights. But more seriously, she took his hand and told him she could not make this decision for him. What she could tell him was that she would support whatever he decided. However, she thought he needed to be completely honest with himself about what he was hoping would happen. Because if he was hoping for some tearful reunion where everything was magically fixed and forgiven, he was setting himself up for profound disappointment. Harry called his aunt at 4 a.m. California time, which made it noon in England. It was the only overlap in their schedules that felt appropriate for the conversation he needed to have. He told Anne he would come back for the meeting, but he needed her absolute word on something first. Anne told him to name his condition. This could not be a palace setup, Harry insisted. No photographers positioned conveniently nearby. No details leaked to friendly journalists who would frame the story in a particular way. If he was doing this, it had to remain completely private. Anne agreed immediately. Charles's letter had been explicit on this point. The meeting was not for public consumption or media management. It was for William and Harry to finally have the conversation they should have had years ago, without interference. Harry asked when this would happen. Anne said next week. There was a private estate in Scotland, secure and far from the watchful eyes of London media. She would arrange everything personally. Harry asked if their father would be present at this meeting. Anne paused before answering. No, she told him. Charles believed his presence would turn the meeting into a performance of reconciliation for his benefit. This needed to be about William and Harry and their relationship, not about performing forgiveness for a dying man. Harry felt something unexpected, a measure of respect for his father that he had not felt in years. For once, Charles was putting his son's relationship ahead of his own emotional needs. It was possibly the most selfless thing Charles had ever done regarding his children. Harry agreed. He would be there. The call to Meghan every single day was non-negotiable, and he wanted her clear promise that he did not owe anyone his mental health. If the situation felt toxic or wrong, he could leave without guilt. Meghan reminded him at the airport that the old Harry would have stayed and suffered through difficulty because that was what royal duty expected. The new Harry understood he was allowed to set boundaries and enforce them. Harry kissed her and promised that whatever happened in Scotland, he was coming home to her and their children. That was certain.